Good afternoon, Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting Oceanic. Alright, from where we left off last time, we got some waves in and some very loosely formed shore wash, kind of, thin tide on sand kind of effect happening there. I got a purple violet aura, violet, light violet, blue aura around her figure. Did a little more detailing to her face, smoothed out the aura slightly, and now I'm going to zoom in over here and start the water ripple effect. And it's just going to be kind of an abstracted, surreal, dreamy sort of rippling lines that will tie her aura into the outside space of the scene. So let's see if I can get that set to where it's going to be visible.
After all, we have always lived in virtual realities ever since we abandoned nomadism and defined a polis and a wilderness. And we've probably set up the first codes in Babylon. These were operating codes. These were constraints on the human system that did not fully implement its capabilities, but rather defined and limited it for purposes of implementing certain design goals.
All right.
Well, now we've been in the birth canal of the design process for about 8,000 years now, and we can see light at the end of the tunnel. The French have a notion of forward escape. That means when the situation gets so crazy, then you hit the accelerator and drive straight up the middle, and that's the forward escape. And technology represents this for us. Our ideologies are probably lethal, obviously lethal, I would say, but they are fortunately a kind of chrysalis of ideological constraint that technology is in the process of dissolving. And, William Butler saw this in the 19th century. Teilhard de Chardin reached it in the 40s and the 50s. McLuhan expressly articulated this vision in the 50s and the 60s. This is really, as Ahab tells the crew in Moby Dick, this is what you've shipped for, mates. This was the plan. Plato said if God does not exist, man will create such a thing. And we are creating a simulacrum of our highest hopes. And the effort to define the actual delimiting architecture of our hope is an intellectual exercise that we have never previously submitted to. And what I mean by that is, when you can do anything, what do you do? We've always worked within the constraints of mortar, glass, steel, our economic scales, the physical scales. VR eliminates all of this. The difference between a 10-story building and a 100-story building in virtual reality is 1 0 in a line of code. Well, with that kind of freedom, the human imagination, which has been defined by limitation, the planet's surface, the needs and wishes of others, is going to unfold in these super spaces. And, it's a Gnostic epiphany. If you believe it, what it really comes down to in terms of the politics and psychology of it is a final resolution, to my mind, of the question, is man good? In other words, with all constraints removed, do we descend into a world of Freudian nightmare and simulated sadomasochism, or do we express something which matter always mitigated against? So that's what I think is, I'm sure we will do both. I mean, the essence of choice means not only will we collectively do both, probably each and every one of us will do both, you know. Occasionally you flop on the seamy side. It gives a literary quality to life that's lacking among the tight ass. So, well, I don't know. It's 9:45. Do you want to riff off that for a bit, and then we'll send these folks packing?
I've been piecing together an essay while I've been here, which I'm calling West of Esalen, which is interesting because if you take a look at what's west of Esalen, you see it in Deeping Cliff, which has been growing of late. And Esalen, as is all of California, is breaking off and falling into the sea. And there is no safe land anywhere. And that's more than a metaphor for where we are now. And it's interesting because there's talk about what Esalen has to do with the modern age, and yet so much of what we think of as modern language has been shaped by what's come out of this place. Talking about, you know, somebody's vibes or being touchy-feely or even doing yoga, which is now, of course, all the rage in late millennial culture. These are all impulses that came out of this place. So there's something about this space and about the body which is incredibly right. And even if Esalen vanished tomorrow, God us forbid, even if it did, the impact of it as an institution has been profound. And I think perhaps what we're trying to do here this weekend and tonight is to extend the franchise of Esalen into another realm, to say that the values that make us human, and the values that make us good, are the values that come out of what's done here, and maybe the values that rely on the body in some way. That even as we talk about this Gnostic release, this uploading of the soul into some sort of silicon, which we will talk about, that there's this body that's behind sort of bitching, saying, excuse me, I'm real, and I am the potential, I am the ground in which you work. Because of that, I hope that we will spend some of the weekend not just speculating, but constantly looping and bringing it back into the body and where the body is. The question of the body is one of the largest questions in virtual reality. That's a curious contradiction, and yet it's true. Where is the body in cyberspace? Where are you when your email is flashing across the net, when your agents are doing your bidding? Where are you, and how do you maintain yourself? And it was interesting because there was a comment that was made earlier about psychedelics as a shortcut versus yoga or one of the other traditions. And I know that in my own life, I need both of them, because I need the psychedelics in order to be able to have the vision, but I need the yoga in order to maintain the stability to express the vision. And so there's both dials there. It's as if the internet is some sort of collective psychedelic, we're going to need the body as we pass through it so that we can explore the zones within ourselves that are the good.
Yeah, it's great what you say about that we're trying to push the definitions of Esalen's relevance, because, you know, the entire intellectual and spiritual effort here over the past 30 years flies under the flag of the human potential movement. I mean, that's what it's called. And certainly what we're talking about here and trying to bring gently onto the stage is an enormous frontier of human potential. We are, to some degree, beginning to design ourselves, or beginning to design our potential in the service of the idea of a perfected humanity, of some sort. And what we're talking about here is not genetic manipulation or eugenics or any of these somewhat dubious enterprises with a clouded history, but using technological prosthesis to extend and enrich humanness, to enrich communication. And it is, believe me, the want of good communication that is the thing probably, if anything undoes us, this will be it. That our languages failed, that we misread each other's intent, that we could not understand each other. So the project of refining language is the same project as the ending of history. I mean, history is the story of languages that failed, and when language grows perfect, history will end, and language may not look like it looks today or sound like it sounds today. The realization that's flowered in the wake of the internet and the rise of cybernetics is that everything is made of information. Information is the primary datum of being. Concepts like time and space and energy are orders of magnitude removed from the present at hand when compared with a concept like information. And as Mark said, every iota, every bit of information that passes through us, that we generate, that we transmit, changes us. So I'm seeing here almost a theosophical epiphany of language trying to bootstrap itself toward realms of platonic perfection, which as organic beings we experience as love. Love, beauty, truth, these are the vectors of human becoming. They always have been, they always will be, and the technologies that open these paths for us are no more and no less powerful than the human beings that wield them. So, this is an enterprise of integrity and millennial implication, and what lies as the goal is true humanness in sympathetic symbiosis with the planet and with these strange children that we have brought into the world, our machines. I mean, that is the challenge at the end of history, and that's what we'll be talking about this weekend. Thanks for coming, and get some sleep. Mark, I wanted to ask you, where is the yoga?
Yoga is 7:30 tomorrow morning. They have movements here in the big room, in the meeting room in the big house.
In the big house, living room at 7:30.
Everyone familiar where the big house is? It's across the bridge, and it's the big house. Okay.
It's the big house.
Okay. As opposed to the little house, which it sits opposite from. And it's the big house. 7:30, please. You'll enjoy it. If you have a blanket or something, bring it. It'll be comfy, but if not, don't worry about it.
We have some housekeeping business here. This morning is a session that lasts till noon. Mark and I worked these things out very roughly, and he'll talk to you this morning about body and boundary, and then that will lead to discussion and so on. And that's it. Mark, there you have it.
Morning, everyone. Those of you who joined us for yoga, hopefully right now you're glowing at least a little bit inside. I actually found the amount of energy in the room, particularly when we were meditating at the end, to be outstanding. I do that meditation a lot, and I was almost blown over a couple of times by the amount of energy that was in the room. I'm going to spin a myth, a story, and it's a scientific story, maybe, and it has scientific verifiability. Verifiability? maybe.
Verisimilitude. Veracity.
Veracity, maybe. You can put it to the test by yourself, you can put it to the test in large populations, and might be the foundation for an understanding of where we are right now. So I want to flash back to 1992, and I've gone to San Francisco, and I've turned my basement into a laboratory, and I'm building head-mounted displays with audio components so poor that I can focus on almost any source now. And we're sticking our head into virtual worlds, and we're building very simple things. And we're just exploring, which is really all anyone is doing at this point in time. And at the same time, I'm starting to get this rising sense of ontological uncertainty about what the real is. That my psychedelic experience is starting to conflate with my experience about reality as it is in a non-psychedelic state. And I don't really think I know what's going on. Fortunately, serendipitously at this point in my life, in walks a bona fide mad scientist. And his name is Dr. David Warner. And David Warner, at that time, was at the Loma Linda Medical Research Center in Riverside. And these days, he runs the Center for Really Neat Research. No kidding. At Syracuse University. Really neat. Center for Really Neat Research. At Syracuse University, and Dave's trip, in particular, although he has a degree in philosophy and a degree in neuroscience, his trip used to take really cheap little electronic pieces and work them so that they can enable children who've had severe cerebral or neurological injuries. So say a child who had an accident coming out of the womb and has a break at their second vertebra, which means they can't even breathe without a respirator. Well, what kind of life can that child have? Well, that child, whom they got when she had barely been born, is now planning actually on becoming, I guess, a rocket scientist. Because she's been outfitted, even in her wheelchair, with very simple sensors that can read her eyes, and things like this that can enable her, and all of this used to cost tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. But in fact, there's so much technology, so much detritus lying around, that if you think about it creatively and you think about it from your heart, how can I help this person? You can slap things together in any particular order and come up with things that are completely amazing. And we don't normally think about it like that. We think about it like big science, like you have to really go to work and engineer the problem. We don't think of it as something you can simply hack together to enable a person to become a whole, or at least to be able to effectively allow them to communicate with you in the outside world. Because that's what we're talking about, is the spinal cord in that sense is our facility for communication. So when I say that the sun rises and sets on Dr. Dave, this is what I believe, and most of the people who've ever met him tend to think the same thing. He's a bona fide mad scientist. He'll never be rich. He might someday be famous for being a mad scientist, but he has an awful lot to say about why we do things. He's definitely, he started off his career as a Marine Corps drill instructor, so he can be very, very persuasive. And over the course of 1992, I got a horse doctor's dose of his persuasion. So you can picture this evening in a sort of musty San Francisco basement in front of a great big chalkboard, and I got a spiel, which he at that time was calling perceptual cybernetics, which is something I'm still using as a word. It's a great big double word. He also calls it neurocosmology now. And it's to deal with the way that media or information in the universe interact with us. Now that said, what I'm presenting to you is a model. It's not the God's honest truth. You can probably poke holes in it, but it's useful to understand certain things. So we're going to take the entire universe right now, and we're going to trisect it. And I'm going to say, okay, everything that's outside of me, the physical reality, objective or subjective, we're going to call that phi. So physical, you can think of it that way. Then we're going to take the universe of the interior, everything you're thinking or feeling, the things that you have to struggle to communicate because they're innate inside of you, but they don't always get out. We're going to call that psi for the psychic realm. And then we're going to take the body, the physical being, this thing that sits between, and that's the very important point here. And we're going to call that effects. I think he has another name for it now, which is slightly more romantic. Or we could go to the William Gibson term and call it the meat, and we'll come back to that. And it's not important what's in Island 1, or Island 2, or Island 3. What's important is that there are boundaries between them. And I will give you two examples to illustrate these boundaries. Exhibit A, our remote control. Now note, it'll turn the VCR on and off. Did you see anything? No. It's infrared light coming out of here. You can't see infrared light. You can't parse the information. So this is information that's freely available in the physical world, but it's being stopped at the boundary to your body, that boundary between the physical and the body, because you aren't equipped. You don't have the sensors to actually be able to see. So that's one layer. There's a very natural layer that's there that's actually separating us from the world at large. Second example. Watashi wa midori no chisai no shito desu. I just said, I'm a little green man. In Japanese. For those of you who can speak Japanese and can
Alright, it's going to be a slow process. We only got 6 minutes left. I'm going to see how much I can do in 5, and then we'll wrap this up.
Interface between your ears and the parts of your brain that process sound and your understanding, your higher functions. But if you don't, then that information is simply noise. It gets stopped at the interior boundary between the meat and your understanding. So we have at least two basic types of barriers to information. So that's the theory as Dave taught it to me. What I became aware of over the period of time that I continued to work in virtual reality, and in fact this became, I guess it sort of burst on me in a very clear sense after a psychedelic experience, that in fact what I was working on in virtual reality, what interactive media, what media themselves are all about, are about retuning or changing the qualities of these interfaces that we innately possess, either by our physical or by our learned and acquired characteristics. So for example, you could go get a set of those cheapy Soviet infrared night vision goggles that are on the market now because the company's gone out of business, and you could see the information coming out of this. You can equip yourselves, you can augment yourself in such a way that this becomes a visible reality. Or you could go take a short course in Japanese, and believe me, you wouldn't need to know much Japanese to understand what I said. And you could equip yourself internally with this interface. And we normally call that interface learning. Okay? But in some sense, what we're doing is we're equipping ourselves internally with a tool, with a mechanism, with an augmentation that allows us to understand it. So the goal, in some sense, with VR, and certainly Jaron Lanier is considered to be the father of virtual reality, he evoked a word or a phrase which he said was post-symbolic communication. I read that phrase, I don't get much information out of it except I get an intuition that this means that we can go directly from one mind, one side, to another side without any intervening. So that the job, the grand project of virtual reality is to mediate away the functioning of the interface between the outside world and your body and the interior world. In the condition where that transmission is perfect or near perfect, I took a look at that and realized we already had a name for that state in English. And this is what frightened me, because the word for that state in English is a cyborg. If you think about, it's very interesting because science fiction, particularly pop science fiction, specific Star Trek.
Alright, that's starting to get pretty fun, but it's a very slow process. And while I was working on it, what I think I'm going to do is I've blended the light violet into the white, watery, ripply line aura work. It's extending into the landscape. I believe I'm going to take some cadmium yellow light and work it from the violet into the white into the yellow around the sun. That way it'll have two sources of this rippling aura electricity that ties the whole thing together. Maybe. I don't know about that. I'm just kind of, thinking about it as I work. So anyway, that's it for the moment. That's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting Oceanic. Thank you for watching, and have a good afternoon, Earth.